In 2020, Democrats took full control of Washington.
And it will give Democrats control of the Senate.
Joe Biden has been elected.
But Republicans stood up in the states.
There was no blue wave. Democratic down-ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures.
Now, we're the last line of defense against the Democrats' socialist agenda. The ways we're fighting back are bigger than you think.
Hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining episode 27 of It's Bigger Than You Think, a conversation about the politics that most impact your everyday lives. I'm your host, Annie Moore, and today we're back with Brent Buchanan to talk about a recent poll that we conducted. He's the founder and he's the CEO of Cygnal, which is an awesome polling firm that we use all the time. Okay, so Brent, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
So after the Dobbs decision was released, RSLC decided to conduct a poll in Battleground states to see what kind of impact that was going to have on the midterms. So can you talk about the poll itself? Where was it deployed? What was it measuring?
Yeah, that's, I think important context here also is that we did this survey in Battlegrounds in January also. And so this was a very large sample size. I think 2,000 respondents of likely general election voters, and it was in all the key battleground states. And even this time we added in Maine and Washington state because those two states have really started to come online for a lot of the same reasons that other states we consider battleground states. And so we were not just looking at, what does the environment look like post Dobbs decision? It was also what does it look like in comparison to January when abortion wasn't even part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the biggest takeaways is that there are a segment of voters that all of a sudden are prioritizing abortion, but it does not overcome inflation. It does not overcome the economy as an issue. In a lot of places, it doesn't overcome crime, like in the Pacific Northwest and Minnesota and some other states that have significant crime and public safety issues. But it did show a slight tightening on the ballot compared to our January survey. And I really look at that as kind of the trough. Like last week or the beginning of this week was the best Democrats are going to have this entire cycle, and Republicans are still ahead.
Okay, so what were some of the key findings that you found based on this survey?
Yeah, so when you put abortion in the context of the rest of the issues, it's just not even anywhere in the issue matrix. It is still significantly cost of living, followed by the economy in general, then crime, then abortion. And abortion is fighting for fourth place with climate change, which is not even in the conversation right now. And this survey was fielded Saturday and Sunday of last week or right after the Dobbs decision, depending on when this podcast comes out. And so, this was just hours on the heels of this hitting the news cycle. Democrats are going to make it an issue because, we did see the generic ballot tighten some with the Republicans still ahead. And in a battleground survey, I would be happy with a slight Democrat lead because we still win a lot of seats in those scenarios. Mm-hmm. When a multi-state, battleground would even show a Democrat slightly ahead. Even look back to 2020, I think it was like D+4, D+5 nationally on the generic ballot, and we picked up seats in Congress. So, just to give some context as to how good even a Republican +2 is on the generic ballot. And all that really happened was kind of a realignment within the parties where some wayward Democrats went home. They went back into the Democrat tent. However, independents are still overwhelmingly focused on the economy and inflation in general. And so, it's not an issue. You're talking about abortion. The only thing it does is drive home some Democrats. It does not bring the swing voters to the Democrats. And it's the only thing they're going to talk about between now and the election because it is the only thing that they have. They have one arrow in their quiver. That is it. And that is try to keep Democrats in their tent. And so as you look through the survey and you see, in the context of do voters consider abortion to be the most important issue or there are other important issues, and it's overwhelmingly other important issues. And of those who say abortion is the most important issue, it's people who are probably already going to vote Democrat anyways, because they were partisan liberal Democrats. And so they just all of a sudden, instead of saying inflation, now they're saying abortion, but it didn't change their vote at all. They were still going to vote Democratic.
You talked about how we did a similar poll in January. How do these results, how are they similar? How are they different? Are there different key findings that you're pulling out of this based on the decision?
Yeah, if anything, under the hood, it's even better for Republicans. The environment is better because, you've got 3/4 of voters who believe that America is off on the wrong track. And, the reason that we see swings between elections is because people are dissatisfied with what they have. And so they want to try something else. So they go to the other side. And right now, voters are looking at Joe Biden, whose image is in the tank in these swing district or in these battleground states. And, those are kind of the two key factors that we look at of competitiveness of a district or competitiveness of a state, simply because, if people don't like where things are headed, they want to change it. They want to experience something different. And right now, Republicans are different. And what I think is more important is that we're even better trusted on the issues that matter. So, we asked on every single one of the issues. We asked within the top issue. We also asked, which party do you trust more, Republicans or Democrats, on this issue? And, when you look at cost of living, for example, Republicans had a 10-point lead on trust on that issue, and Democrats were in, they were like 39%. Well, Republicans picked up 2 points in trust.
Oh, wow.
On cost of inflation or cost of living and inflation. When you look at, economy, Republicans were trusted by 12 points, and now that's gone up to 15 points, even outside the margin of error. On jobs and unemployment, Republicans had a 9-point trust advantage, and now we have an 11-point trust advantage. When you look at these other issues that really matter to voters, then I think are going to be salient later. I do not think abortion is going to have the attention that it has today for the next 4 months, or Americans are going to pull their hair out. And so it's going to come back to jobs, economy, public safety, and we win on public safety too.
Republicans win on the economy. It is the number one issue, but why do you think that voters trust Republicans to fix the economy over so much over Democrats?
I think it's because voters have common sense, and they look at what Democrats have done with the opportunity provided to them, and they have just gone off the deep end on spending. Their solutions to fixing the problems are more taxes, more regulations, more spending. And voters, whether they took economics in high school or not, realize that that is not how you grow an economy. And, while there may be a couple issues where voters don't agree with Republicans, on the whole, right now, the issues that matter, they agree with us. And they trust Republicans because we have a track record. I mean, just look at the Trump economy. Pre-COVID, the Trump economy was one of the strongest in the history of the United States. And it was because Republicans were in control and they implemented common sense, conservative approaches to just let the market work, let people live their lives the way they want to live their lives. And, the converse or the inverse of that is Democrats want to control your life, and they want to tell you what to do, and they want to take more of your money in the process so they can tell you more of what to do. And voters just aren't looking for that right now.
So on this same point, one of your most interesting findings was when you tested both party solutions to inflation, and the GOP solution really blew the Democrat solution out of the water. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah. So we just kind of laid out, what would to combat high inflation, do we increase spending, tax the wealthy, and impose more regulations, which is the Democrat approach? Or do we cut government spending, reduce taxes, and encourage small business growth? And there was a 26 point, almost a 2-to-1 advantage for the conservative policy approach. And what I find interesting too is even 31% of Democrats said that they would support the conservative policy approach. 62% of independents and pretty much all Republicans. It was really only by age range that younger folks felt that we should tax people. And that's probably because, they're not to the point in life yet where taxes really hurt like they do when you get a little bit older. And so it's, 32% of Biden voters from 20 said cut government, cut taxes, and encourage small business growth.
Wow. So if you were a Republican running in a swing district, maybe in the suburbs somewhere, what would be the key issues that you would position your campaign around?
Well, first off, if you have bullet points, scrap the bullet points. Voters are not looking for your 14-point plan. They're not looking to know where you stand on every single issue. They want to know that you understand how they feel. And how they feel right now is squeezed by inflation. They're worried about the direction of their country. And so you need to focus on those two things. Biden is so underwater, it's important to tie your opponent, your Democratic opponent, to Biden's failures. And that, what you're experiencing because of Biden is also because of Democrat X. And don't take the bait to talk about abortion. Don't take the bait to talk about some of these other issues because they're going to want you to. That is the only high ground they have. And it's a little molehill, compared to our high ground of a mountain peak. And so we've got to stay on our mountain. And anytime we come off of our mountain, we're losing.
Mm-hmm. Message discipline we saw in 2021 with Virginia, how important that was. And we hammered, economy, crime, not inflation. Inflation is part of the economy.
We actually did start to hammer inflation. I mean, it was starting to percolate as a topic, which is why Glenn Youngkin ran that ad about cutting the tax on groceries, because it was starting to become an issue towards the end of that 2021 cycle.
Yeah. And education was the third one that we really hit on. And so I know that those issues have been really prominent in a lot of these states, and especially in the swing districts. But do you think that Democrats are going to pay attention to the numbers of this poll, or do you think they're going to attempt to make every race they can about issues other than the economy?
Well, you hit it on the head. We saw it in Virginia. They tried to make our House of Delegates races about Trump and about abortion. Mm-hmm. And they spent an insane amount of money, way more than us, on those two topics. And we had message discipline, like you said. And in the end, we were able to take over the House of Delegates and had some of our candidates jumped into the fray and attempted to talk on those issues. You can't ignore them, but if you're defending, you're losing. And
Yep.
So you want to stay on offense, and the topics of offense are on our side. So we need to be putting the Democrats on defense on the issues of crime and inflation and the economy in general, because they don't have any salient solutions on those. Like, they had their opportunity and they screwed it up.
Yep. So talk a little bit about independents. In a lot of these swing districts and battleground states, independents will likely be the ones who are deciding the elections. What are they focused on? Economy, crime, abortion, education? What are they thinking about? What's in their heads? And, how is that going to drive turnout for either Republicans or Democrats?
They care even more about inflation in the economy. And in a lot of states, they care more about crime and public safety than the voting public as a whole. One thing to remember about independents is they're not all truly independent. Mm-hmm. In a lot of states, there's voter registration, so you have to put down something. But many times, what people put down on their voter registration, they may not believe anymore. They may have put down non-affiliated, but now they consider themselves a Republican, or they may have put down Democrat, now they consider themselves a non-affiliated voter. And so independent is a very loose term. And I think it's important to keep that in context, because independents are very much for the Republican on the generic ballot in the survey. Mm-hmm. They over-index on the issues of inflation and economy. And so when you think about, there are some Democrats now that are embarrassed by their president, who are considering themselves independent when they answer a survey, and they're acting like a Republican. So, we kind of saw the same thing in reverse in 2018, when some Republicans were embarrassed by the standard bearer, and so they considered themselves independents and then voted like Democrats. And so we're seeing an inverse of that now to our benefit in 2020.
That's interesting. Overall, what do you think that state Republicans need to do to win in November based on this survey?
talk about the economy, talk about inflation, talk about crime, and then talk about it 40 more times, and then 70 more times, and 120 more times. And then, by about that point, voters will say, I think that Republican candidate's trying to tell me inflation matters. She feels like me, and I should probably vote for her. Because we get sucked up into this political vortex that we all live in, and we all think that everybody thinks about politics as much as we do.
Right.
And candidates tend to fall into the same vortex, and it's so easy to be like, well, I talked about abortion 3 times, so now I'm going to move on to something else I care about, or now I'm going to, I don't have to talk about that anymore. But you do, because voters live normal lives where they don't think about politics all the time. And we've got to drive that message home over and over and over and over again. And then at that point, they start to realize we're trying to talk to them. And then we keep hammering it over and over and over again. And it's all about inflation. It's all about tying the Democrat candidate or incumbent to Joe Biden and his failures, and contrasting what we're going to do on inflation versus their failure on inflation.
These are kitchen table issues that we're really talking about. What's the best way to kind of bring it home to the voters instead of talking about it like, oh, the CPI is 11% or whatever, where people are talking like in terms that normal people don't use?
Yeah, if you're using numbers and you put a percentage sign in your mailer, you've lost a voter. Like, they don't want to know the numbers, because if you look at the CPI, and it's bad, but if you look at other economic indicators, they're not that bad, but everybody feels it. Like on this survey, and it was in the upper 70s, of people said that their personal finances are getting worse than they were a year ago. And I may be quoting that number wrong, but it's a really, really high number. And so there is a disconnect between what economists and Democrats in Washington are saying the economy is doing, and what people feel every single day when they go buy groceries and they go fill up their tank, and they go, their rent runs out and they have to move apartments, and now it's 40% more rent than it was before. Like, those are the things that they're focused on. And so talk about it like a normal person. You wouldn't go to a bar and have a conversation with somebody and start spitting numbers at them.
Right.
You would just talk, hey, how do you feel about this? How's it impacting you? And then you would share your story of how it's impacting you. That's how we communicate on inflation. We don't even have to say, here's our 6-point plan to solve inflation. Because people realize that, if we'll just cut taxes and cut spending and run a budget like a grown-up, then it's going to take care of itself. And what's more important is that we are helping voters understand that we understand them. And that if you can create that emotional connection, that is way more powerful than statistics.
Be a real person.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be a robot.
Yeah. People don't like politicians. People like people. Brent, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you to everybody for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. And always remember, state politics have implications that are bigger than you think.